Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Setacase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I really love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. This is a very special episode. I will be sitting down in person with Jim Gruenwald, the head wrestling coach at Wheaton College. He's also a two-time Olympian, Greco-Roman wrestler, just a legend. Like, homie can do 100 pull-ups straight. Like, he's crazy. I love this guy. I helped coach with him for a couple of years over there at Wheaton, and I learned a ton from him. So I'm very happy to have him back on the podcast to talk about his new book, Not All Roads Lead to Gold. It's a fantastic book going over Jim's career, but then there's all these like wise lessons that you can apply if you're not a wrestler to your own life. So just it's about perseverance, faith, and persistence. Like, this guy's an animal. So I really love learning from him. Before we jump in, though, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon. If you like this podcast, you want to see me continue to do stuff like this, continue to do in-person episodes as well, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can find the link in the description wherever you're getting this podcast at. That would be huge. That would be a huge boost to the podcast. So thanks for the support there. You can also drop a super thanks down here somewhere. And that's like above and beyond for the patrons, or if you just want to give that way and support a one-time kind of thing, that's cool too. More ways to support. You can buy some merch from my merch store. I'm wearing some Parker's Pensées merch right here. This is Android Parker. There we go. And that's another one from Chase Hahn. He's the man. You can check him out at Bullseye. I think I have a link in the description, but Chase is the man. So buy some gear, support him and I from the gear store, the merch store. You can also find us on the Discord channel. You can find us in Parker's Pensées Pensées Facebook group, where we're having a lot of discussions in both of those things, Discord and the Facebook group. There's probably other ways. I keep forgetting. There's a lot of ways to support the podcast. If you want to, please do that. You can leave a comment here. You can like and subscribe. That will help all the numbers. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review and leave a comment. It helps push this thing out to more and more people. So if you like the podcast, you want to see it grow, please do some of those things. All right. Well, without further ado, let's jump right into talking with Jim Gruenwald about his book, Not All Roads Lead to Gold. And again, maybe not again, but I should say the link to the book will be in the description. So check that out. All right, let's jump in. All right, so welcome to Parker's Pensées. As you can see, I am sweating up a storm. This is hard setting up, man. Yeah. This is wild. But I have with me Jim Gruenwald, and Jim is the head wrestling coach at Wheaton College. He just put out a new book, and I'm supposed to have it in my hands here. Jim, what's the name of your book?
It's called Not All Roads Lead to Gold.
Yeah, dude, it's awesome. I love this book.
Thank you.
Let's just jump right in. So, Not All Roads Lead to Gold. That's a powerful message. Like, why that message and why right now?
Well, I think, number one, I think it's great at any point in the history of mankind to realize that everything that you do isn't going to be successful.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking with my coach, Ben Peterson, who's been an icon of faith and wrestling for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called Road to Gold about his upbringing from a small Wisconsin town to being an Olympic champion. And about 4 years ago, I joked with him and said, yeah, but Ben, not all roads lead to gold. I'm like, boom, there is the title of my book.
Like, in direct contradiction to his.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I like to think of it as almost complementary to his, right? Because he was just talking about his road to gold. But if you look at his career, he didn't always win either. I mean, he also took a silver medal in 1976, where he had the gold in 72. And so that's one of the things that said, hey, Ben, we can sell our books side by side. And he actually did that. He bought 10 of my books, and he sells them with his books.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, so it's just that idea that words are important. I didn't say no roads lead to gold. I didn't say every road leads to gold.
Yeah.
I said not all. And I wanted to be very, I thought it was important to use, words are important, and I wanted to make sure that message, through the title alone, would capture the eye, the heart, the mind.
Yeah. Not all roads lead to gold, and your road was arduous, painful, like relationships, I want to talk about that, came and went because of it. And you didn't get the gold. but it's worth it. Is that right? Like, is the road still worth it even if you don't lead to gold?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's another reason that I wrote this. I mean, it's so hard to resonate with people like Kyle Snyder or Jaden Cox or Kyle Dake or Jordan Burroughs, right? They're so successful. We're talking Jordan Burroughs is a 9-time world and Olympic medalist, and I think 6 of those are gold medals. How many people can actually relate to the elite of the elite to the elite, where my road was more of a let's scratch and claw your way to the top. And so when I wrote this, I really did want it to be about the journey. And so many people talk about the journey, but they're so disingenuous with it. So for me, it was, if I had a chance to redo my entire career with the exact same results, is it worth it? And the answer is yes, because I came out the other end a better version of myself. God used that road to develop me as a husband, as a father, as a neighbor. Love your neighbor. Right. And so that's why it became super important to hit those points, those points that resonate with everyone, not just athletes, right?
Yeah. Man, and I love that. I love these kind of stories because, man, that was me. Like, I wanted to be All-American. I wanted to be a national champ. And people ask me, like, oh, you wrestled Division I. It's like, yeah, but I was the most average Division I wrestler. Like, I started 1 year. Most of us don't start. There's 30 guys on the team. Only 10 start, and so was it still worth it? Did I waste my time? And it's like, no, man. And I love stories like yours because I'm like, oh, that's right. God used NIU wrestling to change my whole entire life. With that in mind, though, man, who should wrestle? Who do you think should? Because God used wrestling in your life, right? Yeah. Is that the tool, or is it just success and failure in general, or is wrestling like a better tool? Should more people wrestle? What do you think about that?
So I would like to think that, number one, wrestling does a great job of learning to compete. And without sin in the world, there's no need for competition. But with sin in the world, we need to learn to compete. In fact, the Bible talks about competition. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Yeah. Right? So there's that idea of competition in there. When sin goes bye-bye, we don't need to compete anymore. But since sin is in the world, it's like anything else. A healthy competition is going to help us to compete with our sin nature, to compete with the world, to compete with life, which sometimes just sucks.
Yeah. And those lessons that you learn on the mat transfer over.
Absolutely.
One thing that you really changed my mind a couple years ago, if you're a wrestler, you'll know on most people's rooms, it's once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And you're like, no, Dan, because kids are pretty tough, and having cancer or someone getting hit by a car is pretty hard. And you're saying it's a really good lesson, but there's other stuff that's really hard in life too. Yeah. And you just totally opened my mind to that, where I'm like, okay, not everything else in life is easy, but I can use these lessons that I learned in wrestling to apply them to life. Yeah. And man, I've just been so blessed by wrestling and God using wrestling. And I'm just like, more people need to wrestle. I think it should be in our schools. All the kids should learn how to wrestle and probably do some jiu-jitsu or boxing or something. I love it. Well, I think we need way more of it. Yeah. What do you think, man? Should more people wrestle?
Well, yeah. I mean, even if you think about from a law enforcement standpoint, I mean, sometimes you see these things where these guys get shot or tased, but I know for a fact you teach a guy just 1 year how to throw the boots in, ride legs. For real. I don't care how big that guy is. He's not getting off the ground. And you see. You see, sometimes you see law enforcement, they do they're doing an NFL shoulder tackle, and it doesn't work in the NFL. It's not going to work in real life either.
And if it does, you're putting them down with their head on the concrete. Exactly. Geez, dude.
Whereas with wrestling, you can find, I'm not going to say a safe, but a less injurious way. Yeah. It's going to hurt. Sure. But you can do it without crippling a person and letting them know that you're not getting up. It's best for you just to stay down without having to tase or the shoot. Yeah. Or if you can't do that, and again, I'm a little fella, right? So if I get some 350-pound steroid monster, you might need a little something to help you out, right? But at the very least, most people I can put on the ground, throw the legs in, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. I just want to chase that a little bit. One thing that's really frustrating for me is that when you're done with college wrestling, it's unless you're going on, if you're very good and you're going to Olympic Training Center or something, there's not another avenue. There's not a whole lot. There's the one in Chicago where the cabbie drivers from the Eastern Bloc just wreck you or whatever. But if someone wanted to take up wrestling, could they? Could they learn wrestling later in life after college?
There are not many opportunities where you just have a club. Hey, come in, learn to wrestle. It's not like almost every other martial art where I could be a 52-year-old dude and I can walk into a martial arts studio and they're going to start me at a white belt or whatever's even lower than that, and they're going to walk me through however many belts I want to get.
Yeah.
So I think wrestling would probably do itself a good service by maybe implementing that as a part of it. But then again, you might be able to argue you can get a similar feel with doing judo or jiu-jitsu, which I know is another. There are other places where you can just walk in off the street and learn. Yeah,
and I don't know. Yeah, we need a good PR guy to change things up.
The other thing is now with the mixed martial arts, a lot of mixed martial arts gyms do have a wrestling component to them. There's one right down in Naperville. I know they teach wrestling there. So my guess is that you could at least get an introductory and even maybe a mid-level idea of good, solid wrestling skills, even if you didn't want to fight.
Yeah. Man, that's good. So getting into your book a little bit, you talked about how your dad said, hey, you're the man of the house now when you were young. That was tough to hear, dude. That was tough to read. I don't want to dig in, Did wrestling take over for that? Maybe you can explain, why'd your dad say that?
So he was leaving, right? My mom said enough is enough, and I love and honor my dad. He was probably the best sports dad ever, and I think that came through in the book as well. Yeah. But early on, he had some demons, and one of them was a struggle with alcohol. It was more of a beeraholic thing than a hard liquor thing, and my mom had enough, and he sat me down, and he said that, and he walked away. And even reliving that while writing the book, it's still, when I think about it, it brings tears to my eyes. Yeah. So wrestling, actually, I believe, was a tool that God used to mend our family. Now, my mom and dad never got back together, but my dad became a very positive part of my life because of the sport of wrestling. Yeah. And unlike a lot of parents who lose their minds, my dad almost always just sat there, and win or lose, I would walk off the mat, say, I'm proud of you and I love you, son. Wow. He would rearrange his work schedules if I wanted to go to a wrestling tournament. He would take me where I wanted to go, and he would just ask. He never wanted to force it on me. He'd just say, son, you want to compete this weekend? And my brother and I normally said, yeah, let's go to this one. Or he'd have the list, the USA Wrestling list of tournaments. He's like, which ones do you guys want to go to? And then he would arrange his schedule so that we could do it. So I praise God for wrestling for several different reasons, but one of the primary ones is that it was the thing that brought me and my dad back together. Yeah, man, that's awesome. Did you talked about the Petersons, especially Ben, because he was your coach. What about coaches before then? Did you have good youth coaches that were memorable to you, that taught you stuff that functioned like a dad, or was that not until really you got to college with Ben there? My high school coach, Bob Carlson, was an amazing man as well. Yeah. He was a really good example. He wasn't very vocal, and he wasn't as intent in his faith. He's a man of faith. Okay. I've had really good conversations with him, but he wasn't Ben Peterson either. Yeah. I think Bob served a very good role. I mean, he was the guy that was always there. He oozed masculinity, right? He had a big chest, he had big arms. He would always challenge me in the weight room. We'd have dip competitions or curl competitions, and he was bigger, and I was a knucklehead high schooler. Yeah. That in a way, I did look up to him in high school, and he was a solid guy, right? Yeah. And then Ben Peterson went next level, and then his brother John was obviously in the same mold where they taught me what it was to be a Christian husband, a Christian father, a Christian neighbor. And they weren't perfect at it, but they were really, really good at it. Yeah. Man, I'm having a really hard time lately thinking about what it means to be a Christian man. And I look at guys like you, and I'm like, okay, there's a Christian man. But it's like you're a wrestler. So people go, yeah, of course, because he's a wrestler. And it's like, well, frick, dude. I need more examples of what it means to be like a Christian man. Because I don't want to be soft. Dude, you're in Wheaton. Like, I grew up here. I went to church here. It was always tuck in your sweater vest, and everyone was kind of squishball. And then I go to the wrestling rooms, and I'm like, everyone I admire is this gruff dude, and none of them are believers. And so I got the picture of, like, I think God-honoring manhood, actually, like what it means to be a man, from guys who weren't Christians. Have you had that experience at all, Jim? Do you know what I'm talking about? So yeah, for a portion of my life, but then you get around right? You get the people who are both that physical, because our character is who we are physically, it's who we are intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And if any part of that's weak, it's going to rot the whole, just the way an apple rots an entire barrel.
Right.
And so when I got around Ben and John Peterson, I got the and. I saw what it was to be around a person who was at least Christ-like, right? We can't be Christ, but Christ was the ultimate example of what a man is. You look at the way he treated women, children, the outcasts of society.
Yeah.
He was a strong man, right?
Yeah.
And so Ben and John Peterson, just as Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ,
Yeah.
Ben and John Peterson imitated Christ. And so I imitated Ben and John Peterson as they imitated Christ. And now I'm paying that forward and try to be Christ-like in my room so those guys see that strong physical man who's also intellectual, who also has his emotions in control, but understands the value of all emotions.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Christ wept. There are things that drive me to my knees, that make me weep.
Right.
And then, of course, the spiritual component, which is also super important. So I seek to be the and.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I love that. Being intentional about that, and intentional is such a Christian word, which is okay, but is that an active thing? You wake up in the morning and you're like, I have these men that I'm leading that I need to be like Christ to? Or is it just kind of come out because that's who you are and that's who God's developed you into and who you've worked to be? Is it an active thing in the morning you're waking up saying, I need to represent Christ? Or is it just comes out of who you are now?
So it's like a wrestling skill, right? When you first learn how to do a move, you have to be very intentional about making sure that you're hitting the technique. You're creating that mind and muscle memory.
Yeah.
But it's like anything else in life. Whether it's a good or a bad, you create habits. And so when you create that habit by being intentional, when I read God's word, am I praying, God, help me to understand your word the way you intended it to be understood?
Yeah.
And then number two, my other prayer that I try to get out daily is, Father, help me never to speak an untruth about you to my family, to my wrestlers, or anywhere that I speak. So I have this desire to understand God's word the way he intended it to be understood. And then the other part. And so you see, let me give you an example, a real life example. So from a political standpoint, and this isn't me getting political, but from a political standpoint, we got one side of the aisle that says healthcare is a privilege. And you got the other side saying, no, you're evil. Healthcare is a right. And so both sides are screaming at each other. And that's the conservative liberals, and they're fighting. And I tell my guys, and like, it's neither.
Yeah.
What's the biblical response to that? Well, as a Christian, healthcare should be a responsibility to love my neighbor, right? It's not a right. It's not a privilege. It's a responsibility that if I see a brother in Christ that's struggling paying his medical bills, I need to step up and do what I can.
Right.
And then what a light of Christ to share with somebody who's not a believer. And again, I'm not saying you need to be stupid and get scammed. That's not what I'm saying, because there's that out there. We're supposed to be, wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So there's that and there again, that we're supposed to be wise and compassionate, grace and truth, power and direction. I mean, there's a reason the Old Testament law failed to save. It gave direction, but it had no power to capture the heart.
Right.
Whereas Christ came and he was power and direction. So it's just another example of, okay, when I wake up in the morning, do I think about it as much to be intentional about it? No, because one of the things I've been trying to do is live my life this way. Now, there are some mornings that I wake up, I'm like, hey, you need to be intentional. You need to hit the reset button. Maybe I had a bad day the day before, and I need to make sure that I hit that reset button on my faith and my walk with the Lord to make sure that I am being intentional, that I am doing it right, to reinforce that good habit of being Christ-like.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. There's a couple... I want to get back into the book here, but I want to follow up on one thing about competition. So I really, really, really like wrestling, and I'm just fully embracing it now. I'm like, dude, I don't care. I'm going to keep going with wrestling and jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. You think this going to be wrestling in the new heavens and new earth? Because it sounded like you said like competition, no sin, no competition. Like, what do you make of that?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you can make a case for and against without calling someone the devil. I mean, I think it's appropriate. I mean, when guys get together, they always, even if it's good natured, they roll around a little bit, right? Because it sharpens skills. It makes you physically fit. Is there going to be a need for that in heaven? I don't know. Are we going to be spending most of our time just exploring God's creation or worshiping God? I don't know. I know one thing, Christianity in under 60 seconds is very simple. We are created to glorify God. Yeah. Okay, he commanded us to love him and love our neighbor in that order. And then the best way for us to do that is share Christ, right?
Yeah.
And there's other things that we can do to grow as a Christian. You've heard me say this before. We need to read Scripture. Right. We need to fellowship. We need to pray. We need to be mentored. We need to mentor someone else to keep us to a higher level of accountability. And, of course, we need to share the gospel. Yeah. If we're not doing these 6 things as a Christian, we're probably not growing as well as we could be.
Yeah, and that's good. So, dude, you really like wrestling too. There was a time where it cost you a relationship. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Okay, can you lay that out for us?
Yeah. So I never dated appropriately, right? There's a good portion of my life where I was a slave to lust and rage.
Same here. Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
So I was always in a relationship. Not always, but there's a part of me that always wanted like physical pleasure.
Yeah.
And I was in a relationship in college. I was in several relationships in college, and just kind of none of them were what I would call super healthy. They were definitely not God-honoring, Christ-centered relationships, because we did things that you need to reserve for marriage, and I wasn't doing that the right way. Yeah. Even if you just want to take the biblical idea of not promoting lust outside of marriage,
sure,
right?
Sure.
And so I was in a relationship. We had dated for 3.5 years and had been engaged for 1.5 years of that. And then all of a sudden, I'm at the Olympic Training Center. We'd had discussions about wrestling. I knew it was a ministry. I was very young and raw in that ministry, but I was looking at Ben and John Peterson and saw how they were doing it in their lives. Yeah. And so now this is something that I want to do. And so here I am at the Olympic Training Center. I'm walking in the footsteps of my coach, even if I'm a shadow of his greatness, right? I'm still walking in those footsteps. Athletically, scripturally, not as good as him, but still doing it, wanting to be Christ-like. And then she presents me after I got back from the U.S. Olympic Festival with, you need to make a choice between me and wrestling. And it was 3 weeks before we were going to get married.
Yeah, and you had just come off a win, I think.
Yeah.
And she said, I think you love wrestling more than me.
Yes.
And do you think that was true at the time?
No, 100%.
Okay.
And at the time I was naive and was like, you can't love a sport more than you love another human being. But then I've met people and heard other people talk where I'm like, that dude like legitimately loves wrestling more than he loves his wife.
Yeah.
I don't know about his kids, but definitely more than he loves his wife.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I don't believe that it was true then, and I definitely know now that it's not true.
Okay.
At the time, I believed it wasn't true, and I'm pretty sure I was right then.
Yeah.
So it was unfortunate that she believed that, and my decision to not step away from wrestling, I think, just reinforced what she believed, but she was really asking me to make a choice between her and the ministry that God had given me in wrestling.
So you meet your wife after that. Mm-hmm. And did she have to get like on board, and did she have to say like, this is who Jim is, he is a wrestler, like this is part of his life? Like, I'm trying to think of someone who's chasing their dream and their significant other's like, hey, it's not happening, you need to pick something else, and they just keep going after it foolhardily. Mm-hmm. Or something. You weren't, because this is a ministry, but like, I'm trying to wrestle through. There's like the motivation of the popular motivational speaker who's like, go for your dreams, and if someone's in your way, scrap them. And it's like, I don't know if that's right either. And it didn't seem like what you're doing. No. So help me like weave through the two of like unhealthy chasing your dreams, loving that more than people, and also being like, this is who God made me to be.
So I've said this often, that a balanced life is a foolish life, right? I don't want balance in my life. I want to be all in where I am.
Yes.
So when I was with my wife, I'm all in with her. I'm not thinking about wrestling, and nor should I. And when I'm wrestling, I'm not thinking about my wife. I'm all in where I am. Mm-hmm. Now, we can talk about the nuances of time management and making sure that each person is getting what they need. But honestly, I couldn't wrestle 24/7 anyway, because you need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to recover. So what am I doing in those times when I can't be wrestling? Even if you go the Dan Gable route of working out 7 hours a day, 7 days a week, that still leaves you.
There's a lot of hours.
I mean, you're still looking at 17 other hours, and if you sleep for 8 to 10 of those, you still have a pretty significant chunk of time that can be spent. And you don't want to be thinking about wrestling 24/7. Right. You're going to fry your brain. You'll get burnt out. I mean, that's just not the right road. And so for me, the easy way to make sure that everything worked was, number one, Rachel was all in from the very beginning. She got that wrestling was a ministry. Okay. She saw what we were doing at Camp of Champs. She was never intimidated by it. And she knew that if there was a time that I had to make a choice between my family and wrestling, that of course I would do the God honoring thing and choose my family. But that decision never materialized.
Yeah.
Because I was always God honoring, or I shouldn't say always, but I was God honoring in what I did, in my relationships and in my wrestling. And so there was never any conflict.
Yeah. Jim, how'd you know that wrestling was what God was calling you to as a ministry?
Because it felt wrong to stop.
Okay.
Well, it's one of the reasons I did it until I was 38 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, I just didn't, it never seemed right not to wrestle.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, at some level, God made you to wrestle, right? I tell my guys that all the time. Anyone who wrestled in college, like, or any sport, you play a sport in college, like, God made you to play that sport.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be there.
I mean, if you want to get super theological here, I mean, we could talk about the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
If it happened, it's something that God wanted you to do in his plan. And even if you do something that is sin, which is something that God doesn't want you to do, he can still use you regardless of what your decisions are. Now, ultimately, we want to make God honoring decisions.
Yeah.
But it's not like we can do something that goes outside the bounds of God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, I think there's been too much good done through the sport of wrestling, whether it be in Coach Ben Peterson's life, his brother John, or in mine. The number of kids I've seen come to know Christ as their Savior. Ethan Bosch, who is probably the greatest product of my 16 years at Olympic Training Center, was not Pan Am champ. It was not World Cup at champ. It was not 30 international medals. It wasn't 10 international tournament championships. None of that mattered compared to Ethan Bosch coming to know Christ as Savior. And it wasn't just him, it was Jeff Shearing. And I could list off it was Chris Mirabella, and then Chris went and shared the gospel with his parents, and they came to Christ.
Yeah.
And so the wrestling was good, but the crown and the thorn, or the jewels in the crown, is the ministry that we had at the Olympic Training Center, and the ministry that I have every summer.
Yeah.
I mean, already this summer I've been to 2 different camps, and I know numbers aren't important, but I mean, I've already been where we've had 28 kids made a decision for Christ in the first camp that I was at. Over 50 did in the second one. One of them was a coach. 128 kids in the first camp rededicated their lives to Christ. They said, I'm not going to play at being a Christian anymore. I want to live this. This is going to be Lord of my life Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's huge, man. When God used wrestling to change my life, because I had a really hard time with Wheaton, so I like being here. I grew up in Lombard, so it's like, when we go to church in Wheaton, all the rich kids, and I just saw a bunch of fake people. And maybe that was all me, dude. Maybe that was 100% me. I don't want to put people on blast. But it wasn't until I got to college and I saw men that I admired, men that could whoop on me, who would then after practice read their Bibles. And I was like, okay, you can be both. You can be that both thing. And so God used wrestling in my life in that way. And so I love it as a ministry. I love it. I see amongst other sports, it seems like there's a lot of Christians in the wrestling community. And I don't know if that's because it's like a Midwest thing, wrestlers, Midwestern kind of good old like Christian folks, or if maybe it's like the Petersons. Do you have any insight into do you think that the wrestling community is more Christian, has more Christians, genuine Christians, or what?
Absolutely. So it was interesting. I'll share a real quick story with that. So we were at a friend of mine was at the Olympic Training Center sharing with one of the swim coaches. They were like, man, the swim coach says, you get all these, there's like 20, 30 wrestlers at a Bible study. He's like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Some of your best people are Christians, and they're outspoken about it. If I did this for swimmers, we'd get maybe 1, 2, tops 4.
Yeah.
And so, no, I think the wrestling community, and I think the reason, I think it's severalfold. I mean, every sport's hard.
Yeah.
But I think the wrestling community is more, they're bolder with their faith.
Yeah.
They're more outspoken about their faith. I think they're more intentional with their faith, and I think that just might be a product of just kind of the combativeness of the sport of wrestling. And I'm not saying that we need to be combative when we share Christ, because we're supposed to be grace and truth. But I think with used correctly, what we can end up doing is we share the gospel, right? And we can share it both. It's the and again. I speak it and live it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So I wanted to ask about when how you knew it was time to give up the career and transition into just ministry or just coaching, not competing anymore. Because, I mean, reading the book, you have all these injuries, like a lot more than I knew, actually. I knew about the shoulder and stuff. And maybe you could tell us about that as well. But a couple of those probably could have been the end, but you kept going, and you went for a long time. You went longer than a lot of people do. How'd you know when it was time? How'd you know when it was okay to like lay down the sword of competing and yet still compete as a coach and stuff?
So I thought I knew when I was 35, and that's why I stepped away and I was coaching, but then was just training so hard.
Well, what was it about that? Why at 35?
I just thought that, okay, I'm 35 years old. Okay. Maybe it's time to pass the baton to the next guy.
Yeah.
You know, I just taken 10th in the Olympics. Not terrible, but also not great. I mean, it was right in between. I just finished a shoulder injury, and I'd spent 4.5 months of just as close to the pain of hell that I ever want to get to, trying to get ready again.
Yeah.
And then having an unbelievable national tournament and then winning the trials again, right? I had 1 point scored on me. It's a miracle when the doctor told me that I was supposed to wait a year to compete, and yet here I am 4.5 months off of getting out of a sling where I couldn't even move my shoulder. I couldn't move my arm away from the side of my body, and now I'm in the national tournament. I have 1 point scored against me.
How'd you know it was okay to compete? Like, doctor saying no, or you're just like, I feel good, so I'm going to go let it rip?
Well, yeah, the doctor said he wasn't going to clear me, and I said, well, you do your job, I'll do my job, and I'm going to pray, and let's just see what happens. And then a week before, he's like, Jim, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to let you compete.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and at the time, I was already back up to like 65 pull-ups in a row.
Yeah. So
it's not like I knew, and I had 2 practice matches the week before, which wasn't great training for the national tournament, but all the things that I was doing on the upper torso ergometer, getting deep into my lungs, putting myself in that dark place, not learning just to survive, but to thrive.
Yeah.
Again, which these concepts that I put in the book, it was just that it didn't feel right to stop. And I can't explain it other than I just kept on going. And you win a national title and you're like, all right, well, it makes sense. It taught me something. And then I go and do it. And then I step away. I'm like, okay, well, I just took 10th in the Olympics. Maybe it's time next generation. I had trust in some of the younger guys that I think they might have been able to step up. And then Joe Warren did it, right? He takes a world championship in 2006, but then he kind of falls with some of the kind of problems that he had, which I'm not going to get into. Sure. But I mean, he struggled with some things. And then so in 2007, I'm like, I'm still training as hard as everybody else. Maybe I should make a run at it. And then the younger guys were like, whatever, old man. And I was like, okay, I'll show you, old man. And then I won the nationals in 2008 and had one of my best national tournaments. I mean, you could definitely put it in top 3 because I won.
Yeah.
But kind of donkey stomped my way through it. Only had 2 close periods.
Yeah.
And then go overseas and try to qualify the weight for the Olympics, and then have the exact same injury. My humeral head drops into my armpit.
Jeez,
200.
Was it the same move or what?
No, it was different. The first time it happened, me trying to float a reverse lift where I stuck out my arm and my body folded over it. And again, humeral head drops into the armpit, tear the glenohumeral, 270-degree tear the labrum, and then the bicep tendon tore as well. Well, almost the exact same thing happens the second time. And then it just got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm 38 years old. I just had a second injury. A part of me says I don't know that I had the courage to rehab and this time take the full year with the chance that it was going to happen again, because the way I competed was all in. So it didn't make a difference that I knew that if I put my arm out there to stop something that it could break again. I knew that you got to do it. And I knew that if I'm going to compete at a high level, I have to be willing to do that. Was I willing to put my arm out there if it meant break or turn? And I finally got to the point where I don't know if I can do that again.
Yeah.
And so I was like, now is the time for me to stop and really start investing. Now, with that being said, in 2012, I was still training really hard. I got the itch to come back out. I looked at my wife and I'm like, I think maybe I should make a run at 2012. I'm looking at these guys. There's nobody special.
Yeah.
Why not? She's like, why not? And she was like, a little bit more, you know what? Just keep building in your guys. So we drive out to the 2012 Olympic trials, and on the way there, she looks at me and said, Jim, would actually have been kind of nice to see you compete one last time. Like, dang it, woman. But at that point, it was the right choice.
Yeah.
I didn't need to compete. And there's that part of me that I still have the itch every so once in a while. And then I'll go to the Olympic Training Center and wrestle with some of the guys and realize, okay, itch and itch, it just got scratched. Yeah. You're done competing. You can do this for a day. Maybe you can do it for 2 days, but to train year round, you would have to start supplementing illegally. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple more things here, Jim. So the book, what's the title of the book?
Not All Roads Lead to Gold.
Yeah, there we go. It's awesome. And there's really good stories about perseverance. It's about coming through. It's about God, like, shaping you and molding you. I want to touch on that deep, dark place that wrestlers know about and talk about, and we try to get there and we try to live there, and the good wrestlers do that, right? But man, if there was no sin, would there be this dark place that we need to get to? Like, I have a really hard time with this one, again, because I know that I need to get to that place. I'm still competing in jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, some of these jiu-jitsu guys are soft, man. They didn't wrestle their whole lives. If I can get them to the dark place, drag them out to the ocean and drown them, you know? That and competition, it's like, I always wrestle with it, dude. You have this great grasp on it, and you always help me, but I want you to help the audience too. Like, how do we square the two of giving our opponent our best, dragging him to the deep dark place, not wanting to injure him ever, but being like, dude, I'm gonna destroy you. I'm gonna eat your soul today, and doing it for like God's glory. How do we do that?
So it's a matter of, it's kind of like being a coach, right? A coach, when you're an athlete, you just want to crush another person and establish you're the alpha male. When you're a coach, you want to build your guy into that idea of being an alpha male. So the motive is different. I'll still go out there and wrestle as hard as I can, but I'm not doing it to establish that I'm the alpha male. I'm doing it because I want to get them. So as a coach, what we end up doing is we should do for our athletes what was done for us, so they can stand on our shoulders and see so much further than they could than they would have by themselves. And so it's all about what is your motive. My motive now, even as a super competitive person, I'm still very competitive, but my motive is to sharpen the character of those God has given me. And there's a part of me that wonders, and it just is something to think about. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer. What if I'd done that more when I was competing? If I'd built more people up so they got better, and then as they got better, I got better, as we met each other doing that whole iron sharpens iron thing, right? I wonder if it was less about me trying to pound them down and more about me having them build us up, that we both would have come out the other end sharper in our complete character as we are physically, as we are intellectually, as we are emotionally, as we are spiritually, if that would have been a better, more pure driving force. Now again, I don't know the answer, but there's a part of me that wonders, maybe I could have taken a slightly different road. Maybe it wouldn't have ended any different way. Maybe there were lessons, and the part of it is, the reason I say that is because the one thing that I came out of my career with that was directly related to my injury was compassion. And there's a part of me that wonders, if I had been more compassionate earlier, would God had needed to take me to the place where I was going to get hurt so badly that the only option was to understand compassion. Right? And so I don't have the answer. I've always said, man, I wish I'd been a little bit smarter and learned compassion before God had to take me to a dark place to get it. But maybe that's what I've needed. I've had guys in this team that had to go to prison to accept Christ. Sometimes you need to go.
I know that guy. He's awesome.
Dan Olson, unbelievable. So who knows? Maybe it's different for different people. Yeah,
I think that's right. Okay, so last question here. You talked about in the book when you met your wife. I think you played Scrabble, and you wrecked her,
crushed her.
I love that you put that in there. How do you keep you compete at everything? Everything you do, you compete. How do you keep that fire going, man? Sometimes if you accomplish your dreams, or if you're satisfied with your career, you kind of just drop what you've done your whole life. You kind of get soft, right? And you take up a new adventure, and now you're in, you want to be the best marketer in the world, something like that. How do you keep the fire still? You're still working out. You're still trying to beat your guys in sprints and stuff. How do you keep that fire? And is it just is it possible to do outside of wrestling?
Absolutely. I mean, when Paul says that we're supposed to strain, and that's a dangerous word for athletes, right? Because you hear strain and you think something's about to break.
Right.
And yet in Scripture it means exert yourself to the utmost, and that's found in Philippians 3, and it's between 12 and 18. It's right in there, that idea of straining forward. So that means that we're not supposed to be that guy sprinting on the track, always looking over his shoulder, wondering who's coming. It means that we're straining towards something. And what we're straining toward is that idea of Christ-likeness, that seek perfection, settle for excellence mentality. And the only reason people slow down is because they slow down. You don't have to be an Olympic level athlete to understand the value of straining forward, because comparison, again, is the thief of joy. So you don't need to be able to do as many pull-ups as me. You don't need to be able to get into a room and fight with your guys, but you can still strain. You don't need to be a super genius that's reading 50 books a year on neuroscience to be able to strain intellectually, right? You don't have to try to pound the Bible out 5 times a year to say, okay, I strain. Some people are just going to read a verse a day. They're going to meditate on it. They're going to do a deep dive in it and mine out of it all that they can. That's straining forward, and it's going to be different for different people. But the idea is that you are straining, that you are exerting yourself to the utmost, and it's not an option. Paul didn't say, hey, if you want, exert yourself to the utmost. He said what we need to be doing, it needs to be in the forefront of our mind, is to strain forward. This is not an afterthought. Oh, did I strain today? It should be a daily part of your life. How am I straining? And one day you may strain a little bit more intellectually. Another day it may be a little bit more physically. Sometimes you're in an emotionally bad place, and you need to strain forward emotionally to get to where you need to be. And then, of course, every day we strain spiritually, because we have sin nature, we have the world, and we have life, which is always trying to beat us down. And so that's what keeps me motivated, because honestly, and if I'm being practical, if I slow down physically, all of my injuries are going to catch up.
Dude, for real. For real that happens. Yeah.
And so I figure as long as I can keep that muscular soreness of straining forward, I'm not going to feel my joint soreness.
You're like 6 months ahead of your injuries. Like you got like 6 months and they come right back, and you're like, all right, I got to push and get back. Yeah, I love that. Well, awesome, man. Dude, thanks for your time. Thanks for building men of God, being used as a tool in God's hand to build all these dudes. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for this book. This book is awesome. I'm going to put a link in the description, but tell folks, like, where can they find this right now?
No, it's very simple. You can only find it in one place unless you live close to me. And you can stop at my door and buy one there. It's notallroadsleadtogold.com. So it's the title of the book, .com. Notallroadsleadtogold.com. And again, it's just a metaphor. It's my story. Christ was the master storyteller. So this is just another person telling a story. I'm not as good at it as Christ was, but it's a Christ-like message. I can't be Christ, but I can be Christ-like. And so that's the reason I wrote the book. It's not just for wrestlers. It's not just for athletes. The number of people who failed at business or failed in the arts only to succeed later on. Again, my shoulder injury is just a metaphor for someone who had some other catastrophic, life-changing moment. Are you going to allow it to transform you to be something better than you were, or are you going to let it crush your soul?
Yeah. Man, I love that. Strain, strive, keep going forward, persevere, honor God with everything you do, and freaking be intense about it, man. I love that. I love it. All right. Well, this has been Parker's Pensées. Check out that book. You can find the link in the description. And as always, all glory to God.